Hello everyone, welcome back to HOWSTUFFINMYCARWORKS channel. Today's video is about how to replace the water pump on a 2003 Mini Cooper equipped with a 1.6 liter naturally aspirated engine. Now even though this is a 2003 model, these steps will be similar for all other R50 models that have a naturally aspirated engine. So if you have an R50 Mini that has a water pump that's starting to leak and you want to know how to replace it, just keep watching. So here's an up-close look to the brand new water pump. So start by removing the battery cover and disconnect the negative battery cable. This is 10 millimeters right here. Set it aside. Next is going to be removing this cover. Use a flat screwdriver to pry on these clips. You can leave one inserted and use a second one and then pull it up. Then once these two are free, you're going to gently pry on it with your hands so you can release it from the fill rail. Just like that. You can use a 3/8 ratchet or a serpentine belt tool to release the tension from the belt tensioner. Just note that relationship of the belt, how it goes routed around the alternator, the water pump, the AC, and the crankshaft down there. And then just move the tensioner away from the belt and then remove it with the other hand. In this Mini, the previous owner installed this aftermarket air intake system, so I'm going to take it off. However, if your car has the original air intake box, remove or detach the hose from the throttle body assembly. Like I said, in this case, I'm going to remove it. Detach this hose from these clips to disconnect that one. Press on the keeper with the screwdriver and then pull with the other hand and it'll release it. The PCB hose right there, you can either disconnect it there or disconnect it up here. Either way. Disconnect the last hose from the throttle body and the electrical connections. All you have to do is press on the tab like that and then pull on it just like that. And once you release it like that, then use your other hand to pull the connector out. Disconnect this vacuum hose right here. Since we're going to be removing the intake manifold, it's going to be necessary to disconnect all the fuel injectors and disconnect the fuel line. To disconnect the fuel injectors, move the retaining tab up slightly, depress on this plastic tab, and pull on the connector with your other hand. I'm holding the camera so I can't do both, but I'm just showing you that that's how you're going to do it. Before disconnecting the fuel line, place a rag underneath the port, remove the cap, and depress it slightly with a screwdriver so you can relieve the pressure. Don't push it too hard, just slightly. Now if you haven't started this job and you don't want to do it this way, you can always remove the fuel pump fuse before you start the job and run the engine until it runs out of fuel. So either way. Once you have relieved the fuel pressure, to disconnect the line, this is a quick disconnect. You need to guide it in. You can use two screwdrivers, one top, one in the bottom, and you need to push this in while at the same time you're holding the line against it so it can spread the retaining tabs, and once they're spread open, then you can just pull the line. Just like that. This ridge that you see here, those tabs that are inside, they clip against it so the line stays in place, and when you push this in, it opens them. A slide screwdriver right there and right here so you can release it from the bracket. Using a short extension and a ratchet and a 10mm socket, remove the intake manifold bolts, starting from the lower ones and the upper ones at the end. So once all the bolts are removed, the next step is to remove the manifold. Make sure that the surface is clean and the dirt's not going to fall inside the intake ports. Otherwise, prior to removing the bolts, make sure you blow it with compressed air. Moving this connection around the throttle body is a little bit hard. You have to tilt the intake manifold slightly. And trying to disconnect it, good luck, it's pretty tight in there. So if you move the intake manifold to the side, you can make it clear. You can see I got the intake manifold sideways right now, so now it's time to remove it. Guide it out gently. noticed when I removed the manifold that the previous owner put silicone. Don't do that, okay? Just install new gaskets when you install it back on. If you need the part number, here it is. Before you continue, use masking tape to cover the intake ports. That way dirt doesn't fall inside the engine. Because if that happens, the valves are not going to seal and you're going to lose compression. That would be a very sad day. Make sure the ports are clean before you cover them, and then just cover them up. Remove the nut from the alternator output wire using a 13mm socket and ratchet, and detach the cable from the alternator. Next, disconnect the electrical plug. There's a tab that you need to pry, similar to this one. Pry with a pick and then pull the connector out with your hand. This one right here. Next, using a 10mm socket and ratchet, remove the alternator bolts. There's two up here. There's one down there. So remove them and slide the alternator out. If you want to have more room for this bolt, you need to remove the upper radiator hose, but you need to drain the coolant first. And then for the bottom bolt, it's likely that you're going to have to use a wrench instead of the socket and the ratchet because it's very tight down there. So here's how it looks like once the alternator has been removed. The reason why you don't see a bolt here is because that's where the alternator bolt went through. So you have one bolt here and then two underneath. You're just going to have to feel them and use a short extension and a socket to remove them. But prior to removing them, you're going to have to place a pan right underneath this lower hose and disconnect it so the coolant can drain in there. Then you can disconnect this one and the bypass hose. Now if possible, because it's so hard to get to them, replace the bypass hose with a new one, this one, and the lower radiator hose. Otherwise, if they burst later on due to age, you would have to go through all this trouble to do it. Looks like this has been done before because these clamps right here, they're not stock. So somebody put different clamps and an extra one here for whatever reason. Your vehicle should still have the stock ones like these down there. So go ahead and proceed to do all the steps that I just mentioned and remove the water pump. Okay, so while the coolant finished draining, I'm going to give you a helpful tip. If you remove the bolts here on both sides and you remove all the bolts that fasten the bumper cover to the vehicle, you will have access to the nuts that hold the bumper bracket to the body of the vehicle. If you loosen them up, you can slide this out a little bit and it'll give you more room. You don't need to take the whole thing off, just slide it a little. So I'm going to pull it out a little bit so you can see how much room that gives you. And I just have it hanging right there, and I just have it hanging right here with a piece of wire, so that way you can see that I never took it completely off, so I didn't really disconnect any of the lights or anything. Okay, so this was all that I needed to move it. Pretty much it's just flush with the end of the stud where I moved it on both sides. But look at the difference. Here on the water pump, I can actually slide my hand in there and feel the bolts. So it's just giving you that pointer because if you start getting frustrated because you can't get to it or the ratchet is hitting the radiator, if you do that, if you just slide it out a little bit, then they'll give you more room. Now if you don't want to remove the front bumper to be able to get to the bolts because of all the work involved, what you can do is remove the power steering pump fan, remove this mount, and using a tow strap you can pull the engine by hooking it up here and then hooking it up on the frame right there where that hole is. I'm gonna link a video to a video I did when I replaced the AC compressor right here. That's how I was able to get more room in between here. So I'm gonna link that, and you can do it either way, but this might be a lot faster. Now you have a second option. Once you're done removing all the bolts and you have disconnected the hoses, just slide the water pump out. Just like that. You can tell where this one was leaking. Right there, through the weep hole. See how it was running out right there? And that's because the seal inside the pump was failing. And these weep holes right there, that's their purpose. as coolant starts coming out, it will leak out, and then you'll know that you have a faulty water pump. Here's another thing I just noticed when I took this bypass hose. It's kind of soft right there and it's bulging. So this right here was going to be another item that was probably going to burst and start pouring coolant out. And if it didn't get caught on time, it could have overheated the engine and ruined it. So definitely going to install a new one. And like I said, I'm also going to install a new lower radiator hose and the other short hose that goes behind the water pump. So that's what it took to remove the old water pump. Now it's time to install the new one. Now when you install the new one, make sure everything's tight and you connect everything that you disconnected back on. Once you're done, fill your system with coolant. Depending where you live, it may be 50-50, it may be a different mix. You just got to know depending on the protection of degrees that you need. Before you start the engine, after you connect your battery, just turn the key on first. Make sure you don't have fuel leaks. And by the way, when you connect the fuel line, if you put Vaseline on the metal part of the fuel rail, when you slide it, it won't damage the O-rings. Make sure you connect it straight. If you connect it in an angle, you'll rip them and then you have a gigantic leak, catch your car on fire. You don't want that. Be very, very careful. So after you find out that you don't have any leaks, start your engine and then watch the temperature gauge. And once it reaches half, turn it off, come to the front. On the upper radiator hose, there's a bleeder. Just bleed the air out. Then slowly open the cap and then add more coolant. Just top it off again, start it again. Watch the gauge, keep an eye on it as it's running. If it starts going past half, let's turn it off again. Let it cool down for a couple minutes. Bleed the air off again. And just do it all over until you don't have any air and you can just leave it running and it doesn't go past half. The reason why you're going to have air is because when you drain the coolant, air enters the system. So it has to exit. And when there's air, the thermostat doesn't open correctly. So that's why you got to keep doing it this way until the air is gone and the thermostat starts working. I'm not going to film any of the steps that I just mentioned because it would make this video super long. So just be very careful when you do it. I'm going to go ahead and finish putting this cart together. Thanks for watching. See you next time.